Well, welcome to the Community Preservation Committee meeting of October 17th. We've got a number of applications to get through. We did a great job of keeping on schedule last time, and I'll try to have that this time as well. Let's start out with a roll call. Nancy.
Nancy Nelson, Historical Commission appointee.
Thank you. Paul.
Paul Bohm, Recreation Commission appointee.
Eve.
Eve Eisenberg, Select Board appointee.
Ed.
Edward Larner, Housing Authority appointee.
Thanks. Sarah.
Sarah Grimwood, Natural Resources Commission appointee.
And I'm Burton Flint, Select Board appointee. Like I said, we have a big agenda with 6 applications and some minutes to approve after that. Just as sort of general rules for the road, I'd ask that each applicant be mindful of that time limit, and try to address things that maybe they didn't address in the site visit, and assume that the committee members have given your application a good read. The format will be: you do your presentation. 2 of the committee members will primarily address questions, and then we'll open it up to the rest of the committee and members of the public. So with that said, our first application we're getting to tonight is being presented by Nate Smith on preservation of historic town documents. So I'll turn the floor to you, Nate.
Thank you very much, and thank you all for having me and considering my application. I'm going to attempt to share my screen here. So yeah, can you guys see my screen and hear me okay?
Yes.
Yes.
All right.
Perfectly.
All right. So my presentation will be brief. I just have a few slides. As you said, we've went over most of this during the site visit, but just a quick recap. So I'm proposing to use some funding to do some preservation actions on 2 sort of foundational Concord town documents. The first one, which you're looking at here, is the non-consumption covenant. It's also sometimes referred to as the non-consumption pact, and it's dated June 27, 1774. This document was you can see that the sort of initial section here is typed, and then there's some additional handwriting, and then there's a bunch of signatures both on the front and then on the rear. So this was sort of a form letter that was circulated to many Massachusetts cities and towns, and it was at this point after the Tea Party, and they were discussing we're not going to use or import or support British goods anymore. And this is the Concord version of that document. Everyone who signed it either lived or worked in Concord. Most of them we think are tax-paying white males. But it's an interesting list of the town residents at the time who was on the sort of the side of the colonists, and it's just a fascinating document and snapshot of the time. The photos on the left you'll see here are sort of the concern and why we're looking to have these documents preserved. There is this housing, we're not exactly sure when it was done, but it's a pretty good preservation housing. It's matted well. It was at one point sealed completely, but it was not stored properly. These should have been in a box, and unfortunately they were just on the shelves in the archives at the library, in the vault of the library. And you can see a couple things that caused. One is the scratching on the glass, the plexiglass, and then the other is this tearing on the side. There's a lot of tension when it's lifted across the sides, and so the tape here, for some reason, it wasn't put in a frame. We don't totally know why, but this is as it exists now. These pictures were taken a couple months ago when I was putting my application together, and if these were just going to sit on the shelf, it wouldn't be an urgent concern, although I would want to get it dealt with at some point. But with the anniversaries coming up of 1775 and 1776 in 2025 and 2026, I am anticipating that these documents will be up for display, or people will want to see them. So that's kind of the impetus to go for this grant, get them rehoused, framed, new glass, and then have them available for display at the library. And then we're also proposing to do a reproduction of each, which would be able to be displayed outside of the library. So the concerns here again are sort of the housing and getting that redone. We're hoping that we do this once and store it appropriately going forward, and we won't have to do this again. So the second one is a copy of the Declaration of Independence. Same concerns. This a little background on this document. This is what's called a broadside printing. It's dated July 17th, 1776. There were a couple different versions of the Declaration printed after July 4th, 1776. This is sort of the third iteration, I guess, in the timeline, and it was printed at the direction of the Massachusetts General Court, and it was distributed. A copy like this was distributed to all cities and towns at the time. The instructions were to read it at Sunday service and then place it in the files of the town. So this is our copy. It's one of about between a dozen and 20 that are known to exist. Almost all of them are in collections of universities, or the Mass Historical Society has a copy. There are a couple in private hands, and the ones in private hands have sold for 800,000, a million, 1.2 million in the last decade or so. So these are rare and valuable. And our copy is in excellent condition compared to some of the others that I've seen, and we want to keep it that way for as long as possible. So this is my last slide. So these are the actions that are proposed in the grant application. The top is just a couple snippets, one from each document that get you a little closer to the language and what it looks like up close. But so first is redoing that preservation housing. So new glass, new support, and making sure that the document is properly housed. The second is digital imaging. So we want to take when we have these out of their case, we want to take a high quality image of the front and the back and have that to preserve digitally. We want to create print reproductions. As I said before, this will enable us to share and display a version of these documents more broadly, especially in correlation with the celebrations in 2025 and 2026. And then the matting and framing of the originals, and then matting and framing of the reproduction, so they all kind of look the same and are of the same quality and standard. So that is what I have for you, and I'm happy to answer any questions.
Thank you very much, Nate. It's a very clear presentation. Let's see. I think I'll turn it over to Sue and Sarah. I believe your lead on this application.
Thank you. And first of all, I'd like to say what a pleasure it was to actually come and see these documents and to go inside the vault. That was a real treat, and it's just amazing to see the real thing. So thank you for that. Really appreciated it.
Absolutely.
One question I have is, how confident are you about the timing? In that, obviously, July, if you were to get the funding, that would come through, and then you've stated July to December, you would have all the work done. Is there a waiting list? Is there any risk that this wouldn't be done by early 2025?
So the way the vendor or a consultant we're using, they have a placeholder for us. They know the timetable
Great.
of the committee. So last year you got successfully granted me some funding for 2 other documents, a set of maps and a plan from the Water and Sewer Commission that was from 1874. And those, when we received the funding this year, immediately went into the queue as soon as I got the purchase order set up. And they've estimated that those will be done this month. And those are more extensive and more documents. So unless they get extremely busy, which is possible, I wouldn't see it going beyond December. And even so, I would say a month at most. And they felt confident in those estimates as well.
Great, thank you.
Absolutely.
And secondly, I just wanted to ask about your contingency funds. From your experience with, I know you're saying it's kind of hard to tell, but in the past, have you ever had to need more for contingency funds than the sort of amount you've got? I mean, and what would happen if you did need more? Do you have that funding anywhere?
So yeah, so to the first point, so the typically the way the process works with this consultant is you take the documents to them, they appraise them in person, and they stand by their proposal fully, and there's very little variation. In this case, due to the value and the rarity of the documents and us not wanting to leave the vault, they were able to put the estimate together via photos. So they didn't actually handle the documents. So that's why I added that, just in case we take that glass off and there's, you know, a small tear that needs to be repaired or something else. But in addition to that, in my typical archives budget, I have $2,000 for supplies and $1,000 for digitization, which could be used to supplement further if there was some kind of more expensive surprise. But I'm hoping between the contingency funds and that budget, and there are other items in the town clerk's budget that could potentially be tapped. So I think we're covered. And they felt it unlikely that there would be many surprises because they've been encapsulated in the vault for many years. But I did want to give, because of the you know, the difference in how we got it appraised, I was kind of hedging the bets there.
Great, thank you. No more questions.
Hey, thanks very much. Paul, I see your hand raised. I just want to check with Sue if she's got any.
Question. First, I would like to express my admiration for your choice of your top excerpt there, which ends "there to remain as a perpetual memorial thereof," which of course is exactly what you're attempting to ensure here. I noticed in your presentation you said hopefully we wouldn't have to do this again after this preservation, but nothing lasts forever. Is there any kind of projection about how long this preservation is expected to last? 1 generation, 2, 3?
I don't know if the consultant, if they would quote me a number of years, but they have said for this type of encapsulation, approximately 50 years is pretty reasonable, especially if it's not handled very often and if it's in the vault, you know, 99% of the time, you know, except for maybe when it's on display. So I think that would be a reasonable guess. And I think the fact that we would have the digital reproduction to share in other ways or make prints of would enable us to even protect the originals that much more.
Okay, thank you. That's all I wanted to ask.
Thank you.
Thanks, Sue. I'll go to Paul and then Edward, and you're after Paul.
Yeah, hi, Nate. Unfortunately, I was unable to make the site visit and get into the vault, so I regret that. I'll wait to see.
No worries. Reach out and we can make an appointment.
Yeah.
We can definitely show it to you.
So my question is more of curiosity than on the merits of the application. How did we come about in possession of this copy of the declaration? I see the printing history, but what is how are we in possession of that? Do we know the sequence, the timeline of the possession?
We don't have a perfect paper trail, but based on the directions from the state, the understanding is that it was read by the minister, who was, I believe, William Emerson at the time, and then it was transferred to the town clerk, and then it was probably stored, you know, before the townhouse at the town clerk's office, and then in the townhouse, and then at some point was transitioned over to the library. We're not exactly sure when that would have occurred. The condition it's in is, like I said, really good. This printing, the broadside printing of this era was done on basically newsprint, or like slightly thicker than newsprint, which, you know, as you know from newsprint, would deteriorates pretty quickly. So the fact that it's in such good condition, I think it must have been recognized as a document to take care of and be careful with very early on. And potential, my guess is the town clerk through the years was the one doing that, but I don't have a huge paper trail to prove that.
Yeah, no, interesting. Thank you. That's all. The only question I had. More curious than anything else.
Oh, thanks. No, that's a good one.
Okay, Edward.
Nate, just a question about the transcription of the names on the covenant. Has that been done and made available so people could argue, yes, my relative was in Concord in 1774?
So we have a transcription of a separate. We thought it was of this, but it turned out to be a petition that was from the same era. So it's not actually this document. So I am not aware of a transcription of the names that exists. That doesn't mean someone's done it privately or in a book or somewhere else, but I did a quick search of our records and what we have at the library, and I was unable to find one. But it will definitely be something we will do off the digital copy once we have it, we make available to anyone who's interested.
Thank you.
And Eve first.
Yes. Just a quick question. Thanks again for letting us in. I won't repeat, but I wonder if we're going to be paying for insurance for this after it's been repaired and encased and framed, and if you have money for that, or if maybe it's already insured.
So I brought that question to Chris Carmody in the town manager's office, who manages the insurance for the town. And he's doing some research on, first of all, insuring and transporting it to the vendor, and then insurance going it forward after that. The Library Corporation was actually insuring this document up until recently. And I believe they still are, but they have, since we discovered the sort of that it's a town record and not a corporation document, we've been having conversations about should they really do it or should it be on the town's insurance. So that is being discussed, and we will come to a resolution before the documents leave the vault and go to the vendor, and then obviously going forward beyond that, and if they ever go on display. So yeah, I don't have a great answer for that, but it's definitely something we've thought of and will continue to figure out.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, and then recognize Diane Proctor, Select Board appointee, has joined us and has her hand raised. So Diane.
My Zoom account seemed to want to update just as I was trying to get on. So sorry.
Always the way.
Sorry, I was late. Echoing everybody else's respect and admiration for everything that you're doing, Nate, and for that fantastic visit. My question has to do with any relationship with the Concord Museum. Do you plan for the Concord Museum to be able to showcase this document as well? And is there a formal relationship with them? Thank you.
So we've coordinated on a couple exhibits, mostly through me providing digital records that they've then created a print off of to include in their exhibits. We don't have any formal relationship at the moment for 2025 or 2026, but I'm leaving that to those committees to decide, and I believe, there's museum people and school, town people involved in all of that. So we're certainly open to a collaboration. I don't think we would want the originals to be displayed at the museum just because of the security and liability issues, but we would be more than happy to loan them the reproductions if that made sense for an exhibit, and certainly provide them with the digital version to create a print or anything like that. So definitely open to it, but no existing plans.
Thank you, Nate, so much.
Absolutely.
Okay, unless let me see if anybody else has any questions or comments. All right, Nate, thanks very much for your application and your time this evening. We appreciate it.
Absolutely. Thank you all.
Thank you. And now we can move on to our second application. And speaking on that will be Dr. Hunter, our superintendent on the middle school field project. So, Dr. Hunter.
Great. Thank you all for having me. Good evening. Gail Dowd from the town is also here, although I've lost her on the Zoom screen, but oh, there she is. Hi, Gail.
We can see her.
So she's here as well, since it's a town project. Before we pull the slides up, just obviously you did not do a site visit over to the construction site, which was a probably good choice on your part. But it's been a really exciting time over there as we watch the buildings start to evolve up from the ground, and we can talk a little bit about what's happening on the site while I talk with you about the fields and what the application's about. So if you don't mind pulling the slides up, and that'd be great. Thank you. And you can go to the first one. So we're going to start with a rendering of the building. So you'll see as you're looking at this, on the left side of your screen or the classroom wing. And then you'll see the big longest of the arrays of solar is along the driveway there. And then to the right side, you'll see those are the common areas, auditorium, gym, cafeteria, library, etc. So just to orient you there. And obviously we have a parking lot to the right with all the solar arrays that'll show as we build a net zero school. And then the first of the spots that we're here to talk about tonight is the field that's there. So why don't we go to the next slide and you can see a little bit more. That's the baseball field you can see there. Same here, the baseball field is really what's within the rendering. This is from the back side of the building as it abuts the tree line. And again, now you're looking to the common areas to the left and the classrooms to the right. And you can see the entirety of the baseball field there. I don't think you can quite, I don't know if they've got on this rendering. You'll see when we get to the actual design drawing, there's also a basketball court and a playground in that same vicinity, maybe just out of range of where that rendering ends. So how about the next one, please, Anne? So this is the aerial view of the campus once we're done. Probably really important to orient you to the fact that the fields are where Sanborn currently exists. So that probably helps you see where the building itself will lay out and where the fields will be. And we will demolish Sanborn once we're in the new building in February of 2025. And then the fields are the year's worth of work following occupancy of the school. So what you've got, it's all in that range of grass there labeled number 4. So to the left, you've got a baseball field. Then you can see the soccer field in the center. And then the softball field is in the upper portion there. These are replacements in kind to what we had at Sanborn in the space that's now the construction site. So there's no additional or extra, we're just replacing in kind. And then, and just the last one, please. And this is the actual design drawing, and you'll see in addition, what I hadn't mentioned so far in the visuals, other than to reference it in the lower bottom, you can see the basketball court and the play space, which actually has been temporarily created now on the far side of Sanborn, probably not too far from the tree line there where the softball field is, where there's a temporary parking lot while we're under construction. The playground equipment was a donation from the PTG of the middle school, so it's getting broken down and resurrected a couple of times over because it's important to us to have that. And the basketball court will be rebuilt. Probably better than it was at Sanborn before. It was barely a line on the parking lot that we had made into a court. So that's the big picture, and the application itself is for $250,000. And I think this is where Gail can probably come in a little bit as well. Yes, we did receive funding for this in the town meeting process. So it is funded under what was procured at town meeting. The middle school building committee had decided, after, as many of you know, quite a bit of challenge with budgets and inflation and an additional $8 million pass to need to ask for more, which turned into only needing 6, really, thank you. So we were able to come in under budget. But any subsidy to the borrowing that the town's going to have to take on, the building committee really wanted us to pursue. And since this piece of the project pertains to your purview, that was the discussion, was to bring this to you all to consider and decide if you thought CPC funds this year were appropriate to offset the borrowing. Gail, do you want to just talk more thoroughly on that at all?
Sure, I can add briefly to that. Thank you for having us here tonight. So we do have the full authorization for the total cost of the project, $110 million, which is inclusive of the additional amount that got approved last January, February timeframe. So we are doing a phased borrowing for the middle schools. So we have borrowed the first tranche. We did that last year. We borrowed 10 million. We just brought an additional 50 million. So we do have the remaining 50 million that we would look to do in the springtime, and that'll be dependent upon where the actual final costs of the projects come out. So if this were to be approved, it would just be a reduction for the final borrowing that we would be doing sometime in the spring or fall, depending on the time schedule for the construction project.
Great, thank you.
Yeah.
So I think that's our presentation. We're happy to take any questions or provide any additional details. I have a lot of details of the field here. I don't know how much you want in terms of how many feet and the dimensions of the fields and things like that. But I can certainly offer that if that's of interest to you, or send it along as part of the application that was just outlined again for me today.
Okay. Well, thank you very much, Dr. Hunter and Gail. Our first two people leading on this application is Paul Bohm and John Crassley. So, John or Paul?
Okay, thank you, Lori, and thank you, Gail. Paul Bohm here. Full disclosure, I'm the Recreation Commission appointee, so my questions will have a little recreation flavor to them,
Sure.
with some other flavors as well. One thing I noticed, so these are grass fields. Are they approximately the same area as, you said, in kind? The aerial rendering doesn't give you an area extended. Are this the same size? About the same
Yes.
size what you're replacing?
Yeah, so the baseball field's got foul post 300 feet from home plate. Soccer field is 210 by 360 feet. Softball field's 235 feet. So all in kind to what we had before. So everyone should benefit, both town and schools.
Okay, and the fields are grass or turf grass, or what are you doing for
They're
irrigation?
grass, all natural grass. Yeah. Yep.
So what are you doing? I don't see any irrigation, or I'm concerned about maintenance during droughts. You're investing a lot in the bulb and grass. What's the irrigation?
Yeah, great question. So through the iterations of getting to budget in the project, irrigation is not currently funded. That is a commitment that I've made with the school committee to need to put that into our capital plan as the building gets closer to coming online. So that is on the radar for sure. We know it needs to be taken care of. I have retrofitted much too much irrigation in this community to not believe it needs to be done the first time. So that is on the radar, and the school committee knows that that's something we have to address.
Okay, thanks. Couple of questions, sort of a little bit more general. So a general question on these fields and school fields. I assume the priority for use is students and student activities and teams, but what's the policy for, if there is one, for the use of these fields at the middle school and other school fields by the general public and for youth sports organizations?
Right. So yeah, so we actually don't usually do the scheduling for all the needs of the community for the field usage. That's usually handled through the recreation department for all youth sports and otherwise. The only ones we schedule directly are the high school because of the regional piece. So these would maintain the same process where they're done through recreation, and youth sports works through them. Recreation works with us to be sure that the school-based extracurriculars are addressed, and usually that's within the first hour to 2 hours after school, and then we vacate and everyone else comes on board.
So the recreation department schedules those other activities?
Yes.
Okay.
Yep.
So it leads me to another question. This isn't a criticism, but I'm curious that the recreation department apparently has not had input or coordination in the development of these fields. I just, in speaking to Anna McEwen and on the commission, I'm just kind of curious about that, and whether there's an opportunity for coordination and letters of support, because as you say, it's a jointly managed asset. So I'm just kind of wondering of the history of coordination here.
Yeah, there were early conversations with Concord Recreation when we were the earlier part of the design process. There certainly was a meeting or two with them present, or the architects who put all the schematics together, and then ultimately the design. So it certainly has been factored in. we could definitely revisit that. I think it's a pretty tight lot. So I don't know that there's a lot more room for huge changes based on what I've learned from the landscape team and the outdoor folks who have put together the design here, but certainly we want it to be a collaborative space. We've worked very well with Concord Recreation on all the school sites and would certainly want to continue that. So
No, I appreciate
we'll
that.
be
No,
looping
just-
it more, I think, as time gets closer. This part of the project won't even begin until 2025. And we're so engrossed right now in construction that we haven't really revisited much of this in the recent 6 months or so. So
Yeah, so suggestion that you try to revisit that, because one
Yeah.
observation I have is that the soccer programs, the use of the middle school fields for soccer programs on the weekend is just tremendous, and you
Yes.
have a lot of baseball fields.
yes,
So the balance of all of this probably needs to be kind of confirmed with all parties.
yeah,
I'm-
absolutely.
Yeah. So last question I have, and it's probably this is more for Gail. So I'm curious on debt service. What are we saving the taxpayers in terms of debt service on $250,000? I mean, it's not a big part of this program, but I think it might be.
Yep, and I
To
do.
cite that.
Yep, I do apologize. I'll have to get back with the actual dollar amount. So we are financing the middle school debt over a 30-year period. So the 250,000 would be spread over, would be part of the next 30-year offering. So it would be the impact of that over the life of it to the taxpayer. So I do apologize. I don't have the actual impact to the average taxpayer, but it would be an amount, but not a significant amount when it's factored into the 50 million we would be borrowing
No,
at that point in time.
Obviously, it'd be nice to know. I mean, not for the individual taxpayer, but for the community, whether it's tens of thousands of dollars of savings by going through this route. That'd be a useful piece of information. Thank you. That's all the questions I have.
Great. Thank you, Paul. John. Do we have John? We don't have John tonight. Okay, then I will go in order of the raised
He's
hands
with
as they
us.
appear. Yeah, I'm not seeing his name on here now. I'll go in order as I saw the hands raised on my screen. So Edward.
Just following up on Paul's discussion with Gail. I mean, my quick math indicates that the $250,000 that we're being asked is about 0.2% of the total budget. And it's not a very significant amount compared to the total. But on the other hand, with the huge pushback about even just increasing the budget last spring, it may not be a popular thing for the town meeting to consider. And for us, $250,000 is about 12% of our I could be wrong on my figures here, but it's a considerable amount, and we do have more requests than we're going to have funding. So I'm hoping that the school will, the school board and the school administration will really sell this, not what we're doing, but how important this is for the school and so forth. And I think it needs to be sold. As a really important thing, and I think the application was very good about doing that. I mean, many of the the importance of sports for kids. So anyway, just a comment.
Thank you.
Thank you, Ed.
It's certainly an unusual spot to be here where we have funding and we're asking for subsidy. We absolutely, need these fields. It's an incredibly important part of the school program. And I say that knowing I've already secured that through another vehicle through the town. So it's really your decision whether this is a priority with all the competing factors you have. And the building committee just felt they needed to go forward with what they had said they would execute and put the application in. So.
Thank you, Lori. Sue Felshen.
Hi, yes, I have a few points in your application which I found confusing, so I thought I would try to clear that up.
Sure.
First of all, on page 1, under project budget, you said that the 250,000 requested would support 15% of the total budget, with matching funds of the remaining 85% coming from the middle school budget. And when you said matching funds, did you mean that in the formal sense, or did you mean additional funds?
Additional, correct, yeah. So, yes, thank you.
And let's see, well, you stated on page 3 that the fields will get used by 100% of the student body. I guess you mean available for use, since unfortunately there may be some very small proportion of children who are simply unable to use fields for some reason of handicap. But nevertheless, the vast majority of the student body would, anyone would be eligible to.
Yeah, and I guess I just add to that, the playground section of the playground of the field and that whole outdoor space is very accessible with some of the poured rubber surfaces. So we've worked really hard to try to be sure 100% of students will benefit outside.
Okay, thank you. And on page 4, under statement of sustainability, you talked about the sustainable aspect of the natural grass fields. And I was unclear about whether you meant they're more sustainable than artificial turf because they do not use fossil fuels, don't contain the same toxins, etc. Or if you meant it in some other way, if you didn't have playing fields at all, grass is less sustainable than, woods, but of course one would then lose all the benefit of playing fields. So I just wasn't sure what you were contrasting against by saying these are sustainable.
Yeah, we weren't contrasting against the turf per se, much more aligned with the natural theme of the entire school, which is to be outdoors and part of nature and really embedding and enjoying and helping to foster that ongoing growth. And through the natural grass environment, we will do that. There will be a decision to be made on irrigation and some other pieces of the outdoors that haven't been made as to the type of system. There's very sustainable irrigation systems, which essentially recycle the rainwater. So we have more to come on that, but certainly sustainability is a priority of the entire project.
Oh, yes, I'm aware of that. I was just trying to figure out how that fit in this particular part of your
Sure.
work. Okay, thank you.
You're welcome.
Are you all set, Sue?
Oh, yes, yes.
Okay, thanks very much. Just mindful, we've got a couple more minutes of time for this, but next I will go to Diane Proctor.
Thank you so much, Laurie. First of all, hello. Thank you so much for making this not a turf, a field that is riddled with plastic and all the other problems for children. I mean, it's brilliant that it's going to be grass, and if it requires maintenance, hooray! So does it. I mean, that natural aspect. I had understood last spring, and if you could just clarify this for me one more time, that in fact that this was going to be withdrawn as an application because the funding was going to cover it. So what happened? I guess.
Circle back as a discussion item. We heard a lot at, and I'm going to wink at Peggy a little. We had a long budget cycle last year with the finance committee all the way to town meeting, and the building committee had lived, some of that same experience with the $8 million ask we needed in the winter. And I think there was just a need to be sure we're exploring all options. And it's certainly your decision whether or not to pursue resurrecting this towards, offsetting the debt or not. But there was a sentiment in the building committee that there had been a commitment to exploring this and they wanted to see it through.
And my second part of this question is, could this wait a year as an application?
Gail, the only question I have is about the borrowing timeline.
That would, the borrowing timeline would be tricky because that would not fall within when we would be doing it. So we would most likely be going out in, I don't know why I'm having a hard time with my years, in the spring of 24 to do the final borrowing for the project. So if it was not done then, to go back out a year later for 250,000, it would not align well with the overall borrowing schedule and the timing of when the payments would be made for the middle school field project.
Okay, that's over my head and pay grade. But
so it does not easily align if it's pushed off a year.
Okay.
Gail, can you just clarify? You said spring of 2024, before or after town meeting of 2024?
It is actually not tied to town meeting because the authorization is already approved. The authorization was approved when the taxpayers approved it. So we could actually go out earlier if we needed the funds for the project.
I asked because our article that would include or not include funding for this will be at this coming town meeting.
If this moved forward, we would then look to time it a little bit differently, similar to what we did this year.
Okay.
Because we didn't know if the fields were in or out. So it would still be spring. It would just be later spring.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome.
Peggy Briggs, see your hand raised.
Yes, hi. So I'm looking at the town meeting warrant for last spring, Article 19, which was not moved, correct?
Correct.
And that was 1.8 million, and yet you're only asking for 250. So I'd love a comment on that. I agree with Diane. Happy we're not having a turf war. But I would have expected either a much larger request or no request. So I'm curious how the 250 fits into the
I think Peggy, it was an
budget.
attempt. Yeah, good question with all the different numbers floating.
Yeah.
I think it was meant to be appreciative of how many other projects you have to consider and that this project has been funded, and to not come in and ask for, a huge percentage of the limited funds that you have. So that's where we landed.
Okay. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Okay, thanks for the question. And Lori, thank you very much for your presentation tonight.
You're welcome.
Unless anybody else has any further comments, we'll move on to the next applicant. Okay.
Thank you all.
Thanks again. Have a good night.
You too.
Our next applicant is Krista Collins on behalf of the Concord 250 Permanent Memorial Subcommittee for the 250 trees for the 250th. Krista.
Thanks. Hi, everyone. I don't have any slides, so I want you to all picture your favorite tree. Imagine 250 of them. So I'm a member of the 250 Permanent Memorial Subcommittee, and we have several projects that we're moving forward. But the only one of that you're seeing in this round of funding is the concept of planting 250 trees for the 250th. And I wanted to just read, we've got some great volunteers who are already engaged in the project, helping to identify some potential tree planting sites. And a few of them have put together a really nice case statement for us. So I just wanted to read a couple paragraphs of that because I think it sums up what we're trying to do really nicely. In celebration of the 250th anniversary of the start of the American Revolution, the Concord 250 Permanent Memorial Subcommittee proposes to work with the town to plant 250 trees. This living monument will celebrate Concord's revolutionary past, as well as its aspirations for the future. The town's history reveals a community that has always looked forward and led with courage and vision. The planting of 250 trees is a demonstration of its commitment to a more sustainable and resilient future, and is a gift to future generations of Concordians to appreciate and enjoy. The 250 trees monument will bring life to key spaces across town, enhancing our streets and our quality of life. Individual trees will combine in a variety of locations to mark 2.5 centuries of evolving freedoms and national identity. Each tree will stand as testament to our appreciation for the individuals who fought to create a new country and is a symbol of a fertile democracy. So there's clearly a symbolic value to these trees, but probably more importantly is the ecological value of these trees. And I think that's, the few points that I wanted to just highlight from the application were, one, how this project supports town sustainability goals. I always like to say the best time to plant a tree was 50 years ago. The second best time is today. Trees are nature's engineers. They cool buildings. They reduce energy needs and costs. They mitigate the impacts of stormwater. They filter runoff that goes into storm drains, streams, and rivers. And there's demonstrated economic value to trees that offsets costs that would otherwise need to be put into gray infrastructure. Second, the project also contributes to long-range planning goals and that it preserves Concord's historic character and contributes to Concord's appeal as a tourist destination. Studies show that business districts with more trees attract more foot traffic, adding to their economic benefits. And trees, of course, are an important part of the town's aesthetic. I mean, it's hard to imagine Concord without the beautiful trees that we have. But many of those trees are reaching the ends of their lifetime. And so we need to be thinking about their successors all the time. Third, we have a pretty good match for this request. We were really pleased that the town manager is willing to make a request for FY25 capital funds for the matching 125,000. And then finally, we found that this is a really popular project idea with people that we've talked to so far. The subcommittee has had 2 public forums, and the idea of planting 250 trees has met with great enthusiasm from everyone we've talked to. So we're really pleased about that. We've got good support from Public Works to carry this through, as Eric Shaw has already been meeting with us, with our volunteer group. And Aaron Glasgow will kind of help lead the charge once we're in the funding cycle. And so tree planting would start in the fall of 2024 and continue for 3 seasons through this fall of 2025. So that's, and unless you want to hear kind of more about the logistics of how we want to carry it out, I'm happy to take questions.
Thank you very much, Krista. We've got 2 committee members signed to this. It's Paul and Sarah.
Go ahead, Sarah.
Thank you. Okay, so I do have a few questions. So in your application, you explain that the town will usually put up 100 new trees every year, and then this is an extra 150 to make it 250. So the committee or the group that you have, the volunteers who are working on where to put them and such like, will that just be for the additional 150, or are they taking, so is the project really 150 trees, or is it all being treated the same way, the 250? Does that make sense?
Yeah, that does make sense. And it's a great question, because it is kind of tricky to tease out, because Public Works doesn't know yet where they're going to plant the trees for fiscal year 25. They have their setback planting program where they take requests from individual homeowners. So what we started with first as our group of volunteers is looking at the village centers first and foremost, and trying to identify 25 tree planting locations in West Concord, in Concord Center, in Thoreau Depot, and 9 Acre Corner. So we'll kind of start with those, and then we're going to have to just really work closely with Public Works to reach that 250 goal. And their number of trees that they plant per year has varied a little bit in recent years. So it is kind of a hard number to pin down. But the total goal is 250 trees, whether they're because Public Works will be planting some of them, the contractor will be planting the bulk of them,
right?
But it'll all be one plant season.
And do you already know where you're going to get them from?
No, Public Works has sources that they source from, and I imagine that the contractor would probably have similar sources. In the back of my head, I'm kind of keeping open the possibility that perhaps on the high school or middle school campuses, we might find sources for smaller, because they typically plant, 2.5 to 3 inch caliper trees.
Yeah.
But I think there may be opportunities to look to local nurseries. There's some nurseries out in Western Mass where you might find smaller caliper trees and do more dense plantings, like little mini forests or something. We've talked about that. So, it would all be dependent on whether the contractor was willing to take that on. But I think keeping open to ideas like that.
Okay. And my understanding is that if more than $10,000 of town funds are being used, then you have to have a competitive bidding process. I assume that would just be around the contractors, not where you source the trees from. Does anyone know? That's a bit of a strange question, but I was just wondering.
I think when I've talked to Aaron about it, that the idea was that Public Works would issue one RFP for the contractors, and then the contractors would source the trees.
The trees. Oh, okay, that makes sense. Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. I think that was my questions. Oh, I have one more. The two big trees, the special trees, they're going to be funded by donations or whatever. Do you know yet whether you have those donations, or do you have another fundraising plan for those?
Not yet, but
Okay.
we
Okay. Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you, Sarah. Okay, Diane.
No,
Or excuse me, Paul. Yes, sorry, Paul.
Just a few quick questions. I have some budget questions and some strategy questions. Let me ask the budget ones first. So the budget that you have in here is, where did that budget information come from? Did that come from Public Works and past history on that?
Yeah, and Public Works checked in with one of their the Davy Tree Company, who they've used in the past to get that rough per tree estimate.
Okay. So I did not know there was a tree planting guide. Thanks for including that. It's really a great document. The tree planting guide has 31 species of trees, some deciduous, some evergreen trees, which leads me to the question of the overall strategy of where are you going to put these trees and what trees are you going to choose? Because the planting guide specifies rights of way, it specifies public and private. It really is all over the place. Schools and parks. Is your overall strategy to kind of spread the wealth around town, or is it to enhance the visibility of certain areas? I just want, and if so, who and how you're selecting trees? I know there are lots of questions embedded in there, but let's start with sort of the strategy of the overall strategy. Is this visibility, or is this spreading the wealth? I mean,
well, I think it's both. I think we want to make sure that no parts of town are neglected. Certainly, trees, areas that have that are contributing to urban heat islands might be ones that we want to focus on. One of those happens to be Thoreau Street. So by focusing on that as one of the original village centers, I think we're kind of tackling two birds with one stone there. So having, making sure that these are, because they are memorial, commemorative trees, we want them to be in places where people notice them and where they can thrive and be an important part of the streetscape. But we also want to make sure that every part of the town is represented in this project. So it'll be a little bit of both.
So is it, so it's more that than overall aesthetics or any historical connotation? I mentioned the historical part because I've seen historical photos. Brian Roseborough wrote an article which had some historical photos with trees lining Main Street. Is there some effort to kind of reconstruct how the town might have looked in certain areas? I know there's some constraints in that, but that's part of the overall strategy. What's your thinking on that?
Yeah. I've seen those pictures with the beautiful elm trees, and the mantra of Public Works when it comes to planting trees is right tree, right place. So they really want to make sure that when we're spending, upwards of $1,000 to plant a tree, that it's a tree that's going to survive in that location. So, Elm Street looks a little bit different now with sidewalks and traffic, and so and plus the elms also come to the elm blight. So, we might try to recreate. I think the idea of having tree-lined streets like that is certainly a goal of everyone. Everyone loves that aesthetic. To the extent that can be recreated while, making sure that it's done with species that are going to survive and thrive, don't impact, when you start to look at the maps that have the underground utilities and the overhead wires, and you realize how hard it is to plant a tree in a quasi-urban environment. So I think those aesthetics are very important, and a lot of people have, that we've among our volunteers and in the public meetings have kind of talked about that, that historic look. we're going to do it within the confines of what's possible with climate change and in the urban environment.
Last question, because I see a lot of hands up there. How democratic do you think is appropriate in the process here? And what I mean by that is, can individuals nominate where they want trees, or is who's making the decisions exactly what the end game is here, and how democratic do you think that should be, and what's in the plan?
I think we're willing to. I'm personally willing to accept potential tree location sites from anybody. And we have a plan to put something in the Concord Bridge at some point, and have tables at next year's Ag Day and other public events where we can inform people about the project and get feedback. And through the town tree planting program, people can request to put get town trees in their front yard setbacks. We also have talked to the Garden Club and the Green Thumbs, and they have ideas about where trees can go. So I think, we're willing to entertain any ideas, and then it's all about vetting the site to make sure it's appropriate and feasible.
Yeah, if there's any project that could benefit from maximum outreach, and you're doing a great job on it, it's this one. So thank you for that. That's all the questions I have.
Thanks.
Thanks, Paul. Now to Diane, please.
Thank you, Krista. Have you built into your costs or your budget any way to commemorate these? Because people walking by a tree see a tree and they may love it and they may want to sit under it and read a book, but they may not know that it has to do with the 250. So have you contemplated that particular cost, or considered whether that's an appropriate gesture to make?
That's a really good question, and I have not contemplated the cost. We have contemplated, or we have considered the need to identify these trees and to keep a record of where they're planted. That some archival thing, and that I anticipate that that's going to be part of the work of our volunteer group, is to kind of figure out ways to do both of those things. But I have not thought about the cost, so that is something that we could consider when it comes to the private fundraising component.
Because that kind of signage can be quite expensive in the end. And I hope you, as you go forward and think about it, noting those, I think, is going to be important. Thank you.
Thanks.
Thanks, Diane. Nancy.
Okay, sorry. This has been touched on a little bit, but Krista, I noted that several committees are going to be involved, and I wanted to put in a pitch for the Historical Commission. And there's actually a landscape architect on that commission. So it would be fun to include people from the Historical Commission who might have thought a lot about streetscapes and what kind of trees, used to be there. And secondly, I am interested in the varieties and how many are going to be natives. I know that I want to give a shout out to DPW for their program when you can request trees to be replaced or whatnot. It's a really fabulous program, and the plant material has been wonderful in my experience. But native plants, I think, are really important. Some of those plants that they offer now are not. And it might be interesting to try to expand the use of appropriate natives. And I know some trees are having a terrible time. In addition to elms, sugar maples are having a tough time along roads, and the New England landscape is particularly marked by sugar maples along country roads, and it all fits together. So
yeah,
that's all.
Noted. Yeah, I was very happy to learn today that the 2 trees that are going in on Commonwealth and West Concord are going to be red maples. So I think those would be really nice additions to that streetscape.
Okay, thanks. And I guess I can sign up for notices from your committee probably.
Thanks, Nancy.
Krista, I'm sorry, just to build on Nancy's question, I thought I read in the application they were all going to be native.
That's what we hope to do. And
Okay.
I know that the list of trees that Public Works offers includes a lot of non-natives, but
okay. Yeah, so I guess if you're stating they're going to be all native, then that 100 that are from the older program, I guess you'd have to make sure that they were all native.
Yeah,
That's a good
If that
point.
makes sense.
Although that would, those would, yeah, that's true. Okay, thank
And
you.
you might be open to suggestions of more natives that would be appropriate in different places, so.
Yeah, I must admit, if I hadn't read that they were going to be all native, I would have almost insisted they should be all native, but I thought it said clearly that they were. So
I would think so. Okay.
Okay, Edward. You got your hand raised?
Whose name are you calling?
Yours, Ed. Yeah.
Oh, I'm
You've
sorry.
got your hand raised.
My
Yeah.
hearing must be off. I congratulate you, and this is a mixed metaphor on being a grassroots, project. My question is just quickly. It says 2.5 to 3.5 inches. It's about that tall. Is that correct?
Oh, it's caliper, so it's the diameter of the tree trunk.
Oh, okay. Thank you. It concerned me when it was.
Diameter, breast height.
Okay. It did say caliper, and I had no idea what that was. So, thank you.
Thanks for the clarification, Edward. All right, unless anybody has any further questions, Krista, I think we are set. Any questions? Okay. Thanks very much for the application and your time tonight, Krista. Appreciate it.
Thanks, Krista.
Thank you.
Okay, and that takes us to the next application, which is the preservation of cemetery metal structures, and I wasn't sure who is presenting on that tonight. Is there somebody here from either the
I think it's Rod.
Rob?
Yes.
Is it Rod?
Yes, it
Okay,
is. This
Rod.
is
Yep, thanks.
this is Rod Rydell, 324 Main Street. I'm chair of the Concord Cemetery Committee and representing the Cemetery Committee and the Department of Public Works. And we have a small presentation, and I believe that we have it. And so can we present this? Anne?
We can see it
Thank you. Anne, may I have the next slide, please? I want to open this up by thanking all of you for the CPC's past support over many decades, but most recently at last year's town meeting where we received a matching grant of $340,000 to initiate cemetery stone wall restoration within the 3 cemeteries. And that work, the actual repair and restoration work has not started, but the financial infrastructure, the procurement process, all of the administrative elements that are necessary to support that work have begun and started following the July 1st milestone and checks and funding being available. So thank you very much. And on behalf of all of our committee members and CPW, we want to thank all of you for reviewing our new grant request, and that is to do an evaluation of the cemetery metal structures. We know you're all incredibly busy. We appreciate your time. Thank you. May I have the next slide, please? So our project goal is to evaluate all the metal structures in Concord's 3 historic cemeteries. The 2 cemeteries that are in town center, the Old Hill Burying Ground and the South Burying Ground, and in Sleepy Hollow Cemetery. And the next slide details what those evaluations, how many there are. In the South Burying Ground, which is on Main Street adjacent to Middlesex Bank, there's a perimeter fence. In Old Hill Burying Ground, there's a gate, which is missing. I'll show you that on the next slide. And then in Sleepy Hollow Cemetery, there are 19 evaluations, various perimeter fences, entry gates, 1 door, bollards and chains, handrails, and some cemetery plot fences for which the town has jurisdiction. The next slide, I'll show you some examples. I know that the committee visited some of the gates at Sleepy Hollow Cemetery, but I thought I'd show you a few other examples. The South Burying Ground, this is the metal fence, perimeter fence that aligns on Main Street. The fence is bent in certain places. It is corroded in many places. Some of the pickets are missing. And in some cases, it's been bent on the granite curb on which it rests. In Old Hill Burying Ground, this is right next to the Catholic Church. We have 3 granite posts, which now occupy a metal gate, the space that was occupied by a metal gate. That gate was originally installed in 1845-46, but then was replaced with those 3 granite posts in 1857-58. So literally 10 or 11 years to prevent children from coasting in the snow down the hill and into the center of town. And the nuisance of, I guess, the swinging gate was interfering with something. But that was it. And we are still looking for a picture of that, or a drawing or a sketch of that gate. We haven't been able to find one yet, but we'll continue to look for that. Next slide, more examples. We go to Sleepy Hollow Cemetery. I think you all, the group that visited Pritchard Gate, which is one of the most heavily used gates in the cemetery. Pritchard Gate was originally placed there in 1891-92, which, and as a result of a donation by William Pritchard, and the brick posts were replaced in 1947 with the granite posts that are there today. But much to our chagrin, the gate is deteriorating quite rapidly, and at the base of the gate, if you look at a close-up, you will actually see that the corrosion has gone completely through the metal structure. More recently, there's been granite posts and chains as a border fence on Bedford Road. And despite the fact that those are only a few decades old, the chain links are starting to show signs of corrosion. So we want to do an evaluation. And what is that proposed evaluation? That's shown on the next slide. Anne, if I could have that, thank you. We want to do this with a skilled assessor, and it's an engineering company. To give you an example, we use Wright Pierce as an engineering company that did the assessment of all of our stone structures, that helped us to evaluate what needed to be done and how much it might cost. And so what this grant is to cover the cost of doing that assessment, to recommend whether to preserve, and that is to repair and restore, or replace if the deterioration is so great that it makes no sense to repair and restore it, to estimate the cost, and to note issues associated with historic structures, and whether or not that requires special consideration, special treatments, which may result in increased costs. May we have the next slide, please? The historic considerations are significant because all 3 cemeteries are listed in the Massachusetts Register of Historic Places, and Old Hill Burying Ground and Sleepy Hollow Cemetery are listed in the National Register of Historic Places. This is an advantage for our cemeteries, but also carries a burden of responsibility, so that we do whatever is necessary to maintain the spirit and the letter of the guidance that are contained by these registers for the maintenance of historic structures. May I have the next slide, please? So we are requesting $22,500 from CPA. The town will match a partial match here with $2,500 for a total of $25,000. I just want to give you a comment. When we presented last year for the cemetery stone structures, the town had paid for the assessment of the stone structures and the cost of their repair or their restoration. We tried to do that this year, and 2 things happened in the early spring, which led us to make a decision to apply for a grant. One, there were unexpected issues that came up, most notably a drainage issue, which required a lot of reallocation of funds. from the operating budget for the year. The other was the damage late in the summer, early in the autumn from the storm, where we lost 3 very large trees, some of which caused significant damage to at least one gravestone in the cemetery. And so it became to us the reality is that despite our attempts to try and sequester funds, there's always an emergency that seems to come up year after year. And so we decided we would approach the CPC for this grant in order to protect this activity, which is important. It's not an emergency, but it's important. And if we don't start to address these issues, it will become an emergency with some of these structures. Last slide, please. So happy to answer questions or discussion. Here's 2 more examples. We have stair handrails in Sleepy Hollow Cemetery and in the knoll of Sleepy Hollow Cemetery. And of course, deterioration of those are a safety issue. And then a very historic structure, the receiving tomb that was constructed and dated there in 1855. This was the place where bodies were stored in the winter until the thaw, so that graves could be dug. And that steel door is seriously deteriorated and requires repair and restoration. But I'm happy to answer any questions, open to discussion, and thank you very much for listening to our presentation.
Thank you for that, Rod. Our first questioners tonight are Paul and Sarah. Paul, do you want to go first this time?
We're busy tonight, Sarah, huh?
Yes. We are.
So I have 2 questions, Rod. Really interesting project. I think in the stone wall project, you included a prioritization when you did the assessment and looked at the funding. Will this assessment include a prioritization of structures so that later funding can be maybe done in stages?
It's a great question, Paul. The prioritization that we applied for our funding request last year, we did that as an overlay on the estimate from the contractor. We discussed what the contractor had determined, and then we established the priority. And just for historical purposes, we only asked you for a matching grant for half of the funding that the contractor had estimated was necessary for all of the structures to be done, stone structures to be repaired and restored in the cemetery. There were 2 reasons for that. One is, it's over $1 million, and we weren't ready to ask for that kind of money. Number one, we want to find out if their estimate is accurate. We want to see just how good a job and how historically appropriate those reconstructions can occur. So we already have taken a staged, step-by-step approach with the stone structures. We're going to do the same here, but we anticipate that there's going to be a lot more complexity in terms of the metal structures here with their historic significance and the implications of whatever we do. I mean, just to give you an example, one of the considerations we have is, should we be applying some kind of a coating to these surfaces to protect them from corrosion once they've been restored? Well, we had a discussion over the last year. CPW spent an enormous time with a number of consultants trying to figure out what the appropriate coating would be for the fence, the most recent fence in Sleepy Hollow Cemetery, which is at the knoll, and it's showing sign of deterioration. And we still haven't gotten to a final decision. It's humbling to say that it's a lot more complicated than anyone ever imagined. So we want to go this in a step-by-step fashion, want to get an estimate, and then we're going to come back and decide, should we ask this group for some funding? Should we go elsewhere? We just don't know right now, and we won't know until we start getting some basic information from this assessment.
Thank you, which leads to my second and final question, which I think you've answered. But we like applicants to indicate if this has been multi-year projects. So it seems to me that you have to decide, there's going to be some funding needed to implement these priorities. Would you anticipate that there'll be applications for the actual work done
There
on
may,
this?
and the answer is a definite maybe. I mean, no, look, we're all taxpayers. We have an obligation to, spend the money, appropriately and conservatively because it's taxpayer money. And that's courtesy and respect, for the funding source. So we don't want to make a frivolous request, and we certainly don't want to take an air poll on a budget and say, well, we're going to need, $200,000 because we thought that was a reasonable number to ask at this time. We don't want to do that. We need to have something that we can give you as facts, and then most likely we need to check the accuracy of those estimates in the initial repairs before. So I anticipate if we are coming back to CPC that we might come back multiple times over the next 5 years, right? For that in small increments, just to be sure that we're spending the money appropriately and wisely and effectively to get these repairs done. And then,
no, thank you.
And then lastly, with each structure that's restored or repaired, preserved, we want to put in a preventative maintenance program, build that into the annual budget. All right. We don't want to be in this position 10 years or 15 years from now, coming back and saying, well, we fixed them all up, but nobody took care of them. And so we're going to have to do the repair and restoration all over again. It's the same way with the stone walls. I want to have a preventative maintenance budget, which is part of the annual budget for the cemeteries, protected money that goes into this.
Yeah, and I didn't mean to paint you in a corner, but my personal view, I'm not speaking for the committee, is that while we appreciate the need for studies and assessments, we'd like to see actual projects move forward. So it would be great if if we could talk about real projects in the future, but that's
Sure.
Not tonight.
You've answered the question. Thank you.
You're
Sarah.
Two questions. So one, I assume from your comments previously, Rod, that there hasn't been any maintenance of metal structures to date in your knowledge or time looking after these.
No, I haven't seen a preventative maintenance program, and I'm a strong proponent of preventative maintenance for these things, so that you can take them for granted, because there's a little bit of money being spent each year to maintain them in a state that doesn't require large capital expenditures.
And secondly, I mean, you touched on this a bit in relation to Paul's questions, but I'm just intrigued as to your thinking of and you're proposing an assessment of everything, but then it's going to take a few years to get the funding and gradually work through all the recommendations. And I'm assuming that over time, if there's deterioration, that over a few more years, if you don't do it quickly, then you may need another assessment to say what needs doing. So I wonder if in your thought process you had considered just picking on the structures that appear to be the worst for wear and dealing with them as quickly as you can, rather than just doing an assessment of everything. Just interested in the thought process on how you took the approach you did.
No, it's a great question. Thank you, Sarah. We wanted this year or next year, we hope to do an assessment. We think that all of the structures can be assessed. Wright Pierce last year did many dozens. I forget the total number of stone structures, but they were very efficient, and they put them in two categories: minor repairs, major repairs. I think we're going to get an assessment like that. Pritchard Gate is probably going to be, the big debate will be restore it or replace it, as an example. And the same is true for the steel door at the receiving tomb. That's going to be the debate. And we'll look at it in terms of whatever restrictions or constraints we have due to the being part of the historical national or state registers, and then make a determination about how much it costs in both scenarios, and then come back to the town with a recommendation, going forward. So the most likely scenario is that if we do get the assessment done next autumn and early spring, that we'll be coming back to you in the autumn of next year with a, if we come back to CPC and we don't go someplace else, we will come back with a ranked list and say, these are the 3 or 4 or 5 most important structures. And that's what we'll do. Yeah.
That makes sense. Thank you. No more questions.
Okay, thank you. Nancy.
Rod, I know you probably already know this, but as you go forward with contracting for the assessment, if you could make certain that whoever is awarded the contract, assuming it's funded and all that, that those people understand the meaning of the Secretary of the Department of Interior standards for the rehabilitation of historic resources. And sometimes it's much easier and sometimes cheaper to replace than to rehabilitate or restore. So avoiding a rush to judgment on that might be something to watch for in the future.
Thank you. That's great information. And I believe that at the Historical Commission, you were you the one that recommended we talk to the group down by the Minuteman National Park?
Yes.
And so we're going to do that. It's on my to-do list. Yeah,
well, I owe you the information about that company, probably.
That's okay. We'll start. We
yeah.
we don't mind just asking and just being persistent doing that.
Yeah.
No, but thank you, Nancy. You're absolutely right. No, that was my 20-minute time mark, Burton. So I'm sorry. We just finished our 20 minutes, but I hope you have a few other questions.
Seconds.
I had a few more seconds, so we're going to squeeze in Diane Proctor, please.
Thank you, Rod. Rod, in looking at the gate that literally is off its hinges, I'm kind of where Sarah is in wondering whether it is not prudent to try to do something a little bit more swiftly than waiting for another year and a half. I can't imagine that the gates that we saw will be standing a year and a half from now.
No, I appreciate your sense of urgency, and it sometimes, well, it's like my vision, my appearance on Zoom. Sometimes things look a lot worse than they actually are. So that's I mean, that's one consideration. And the other point is we rarely close those gates, so they're frequently just left open. So they're not really operational gates, and we can do things to maintain them protective, in a protected way until we get a chance to, once again, have real operational gates.
That's reassuring, because I just imagined if you kept opening and closing those over the next more than 365 days, they wouldn't be standing. Thank you so much.
Yeah.
Thank you, Diane. Thank you, Rod, for the information. Appreciate it. Seeing no further hands raised, we will move on to our next application, which is from Natalie, and correct my pronunciation, Fondrist. I hope you will correct that, and from the Concord Art Association. Natalie, you are mute.
Yes, hi, thanks. I'm Natalie Fondria, so close. And I'm the grant writer at Concord Art. I'm also joined tonight by Kate James, our executive director, the other Natalie on our staff, Natalie Reiser, our assistant director, as well as John Battle from Battle Architects and Halsey Platt from Platt Builders, who we've been working with, and everyone will be available to help answer questions at the end. But first, I'm going to pull up some slides and give a brief overview of our project. All right, you can see that?
Yep.
All right, great. So we've gone through who's who. And all right, as many of you already know, Concord Art celebrated its 100th birthday just last year. And in honor of that milestone, we launched a Centennial Capital Campaign with the goal of setting up Concord Art for success in the century ahead. And this goal entails redesigning our classroom into a multi-purpose programming space and implementing critical repairs and updates to the historic section of our building. It is specifically for the total cost of work in the historic section that we are seeking support from the Community Preservation Fund. And the work to create the new space at the back of our building, which you see in black, will directly impact the work we need to do in the historic section, which you see here in white. So it makes sense to tackle all this together. That's especially true when it comes to our sprinkler system. The small addition of square footage with that new space means that now is the time to put in a sprinkler system because due to code requirements, we are going to exceed the 7,500 square foot mark. Currently, our building is 7,349 square feet. And so we have not had to update to code for a long time, and the sprinkler system is necessary to protect the building and the art that we display. So the Secretary of Interior's standards, specifically for health and safety, include installing sensitively designed fire suppression systems like a sprinkler system. We know we need to adhere to these standards for all the work we're going to talk about. And the sprinkler system constitutes the most significant cost of work in our historic section. I'm going to run through the other parts of our projects, which should look familiar from our site visit, and with some more helpful photos. All right, let's go on. So again, this text should look familiar from our application, but to reiterate, we need to repoint our primary chimney, which sits over the skylight built in 1922 above our main gallery. And this will involve removing individual slates from the roof and staging the front and rear of the chimney. And the team will have to cut brick joints and tuck point the chimney from the roof line up. We will also have to repair the floor of our first floor bathroom in order to be structurally sound. I know not everyone got to go down to the basement during our site visit last month, so I have included handy dandy photos from the basement on this slide as well as the next. So we're going to need to frame a new pressure treated structure under the existing floor in order to support the flooring and span around the existing toilet waistline. Of course, this work is going to involve removing and then resetting the toilet. And then in our print room, you can see the water damaged ceiling that will need to be removed and replaced. There's a bunch of work that we need to do in this print room of ours, which brings us to the next slide. This photo you're looking at is taken from within the print room, looking at the adjacent gallery, or Abbott Gallery as we call it. And you can see both those spaces on either side of that wall on this slide. So these two rooms on either side of that non-load bearing wall will be merged into one space when that wall is removed. During construction, that merged space will serve as a temporary classroom. But ultimately, once construction is done, the merged space will become one large gallery. And so by moving our printmaking equipment into the new classroom or programming space, we will be able to remove those cubbies that you see in the bottom photo on the left there, and other storage in order to really bring out the historic details of the space so that they're visible again. Visitors will be able to see the original side door, which is behind the cabinets on the right there. A little tough to see in the photo, but I think we pointed it out during that site visit. And we really just want to celebrate the space that we're in, because ultimately we are a community center and we want to do right by our community and the space that we get to occupy every day. So that gives you an overview. Thank you for your time. And like I said, we're all happy to answer questions.
Great, thank you, Natalie. Our two committee members assigned to this application are Nancy and Ed.
Yeah.
So Nancy, yes, please.
I would like to say that this was one impressive application. and part of it I'm not expert in. Much of it I'm not expert in, like the finances and all that detail is really amazing. But I do have some questions that are more closely related to the historic nature of the building. And I think on the tour, it was clarified that that initial treatment for the side entry seemed to have been part of that is part of the original fabric of the house. And someone, I think, told me that that was not going to be removed anymore. Is that correct?
That's correct.
Okay, good. That's really nice. I know you've got people who know the Secretary standards backwards and forwards, so it's a terrific team. So that was one thing. And then I was curious, it's such a big project and the CPC money is part of that, but have you decided what is CPC funded versus what is privately funded? Because that might make a difference in terms of your compliance with the Secretary's standards.
So I can tell you that the total that we've asked the CPC for is our budget for the work in the historic section. I would pass it off to one of our directors to talk more about the breakdown of the larger project, since in my mind it's one large project that includes both the classroom.
Well, that's really helpful if the CPC money is all going towards work in the historic structure, because I have another question related to that.
Okay.
So maybe I don't need to know the breakdown for the whole project.
Okay.
But regarding the wall demo, I think I understood on the tour that that wall itself is not historic. It's a much more modern wall. I remember it used to be the gallery in honor of your founder, as I recall. Is that correct? And ultimately now it's going to be one big gallery, but there's some original fabric still in that building, like the doorway that goes from the gallery into the print room. The frame, it seems modern, but some of the structure, the cupboard and the woodwork and trim, I don't know, Eve could help me here. But that looks older and might be modern, but at least historic. And I wonder what will happen to that and the floors and the other historic fabric.
May I address that one?
Who's that? John.
This is John Battle.
Yeah.
So the wall is in fact not original fabric. The door itself is also not original fabric.
Right.
It's a 20th century door to look, to mimic the old style. The elements of the truly historic fabric of that room, actually behind that existing sink in the print room, there is an old component of wall paneling and fireplace that we essentially rewrapped, and that will all be re-exposed when the new work gets returned to being a real gallery. So we're essentially using this opportunity to re-expose original fabric which we had saved rather than demo in years past.
That's great. And what about on the right-hand side of that modern door and door frame and wall to the right of that? Isn't that historic, much more historic fabric over on the right-hand side? And what happens to that?
It stays. It stays, yeah. It is historic and it will stay. Nothing will happen to that part of the structure. Okay.
Thank you. Those were my concerns. I was really impressed with the application, but I can't decipher all the financials, so I'll keep trying.
But I will reiterate just to Nancy, just to say that the budget that's been requested is directly targeted to those pieces of the puzzle that are being addressed in the application. The funding for the new construction, the new classroom addition, is a much larger number, and is all being funded privately.
Yeah, that's what I thought. It must have been an interesting conversation to talk about what kind of fire suppression would be required.
Yes.
Yes.
We don't have to go into that here. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Nancy. Edward.
I would like to reiterate what Nancy said about how wonderful that application was. Really professional and really gave a good idea. I did not go down into the basement, but I was horrified looking at that picture about what's been done. I mean, my dad used to think he was a really good carpenter and do things like that, but luckily nothing ever fell down. But that looked thing. The thing that I talked about with you guys is the relationship between the Concord Art Association and Concord Art, which are really they're the same entity, but there is to me a difference in the last 20 years or so of turning the art association into basically a place for exhibits, as a gallery and as a storage of famous and valuable art into a real dynamic some really teaching facility with opportunity of really helping the community express itself. And I think I just we had a discussion about whether the two were two separate entities, one a nonprofit and the other LLC or something like that. But my understanding is that everything is really under a nonprofit basis. And the other thing is that I think you did break down pretty well that the expenses that we're asking you to fund are on the historic building. And I was impressed about that skylight that was built in the 1920s. And I understand the architect was the first woman graduate of MIT's architecture program. So, there's a lot of pride that goes into that whole art association, or I should say the Concord Art.
You can call us Concord Art. Concord Art Association is our legal name, and we are absolutely a nonprofit. We think of serving 3 integrated purposes to support our mission of bringing arts and artists out to Concord and enriching our cultural community. And so those 3 integrated purposes are to be a gallery, a museum, and a school. So they're really all tied together in our minds.
Well, thank you for doing such a good job.
Thank you.
Thank you for the comments, Ed. Nancy, you've got
I'd just like to say what was also really great, and I thought it was so well addressed, was how this work will also help you to be more financially secure in the future, as well as reaching more people in the community. But that's so important for nonprofit organizations. I think that's really great.
Thank you, Nancy. Eve.
Hey guys, thanks again for this great application. I just have a couple really quick questions. John, if there's already a drawing done for the new floor plan of that back gallery classroom space, that would be great to have. But what we've got now are existing plans, and we've got the proposal for the new classrooms, the modern sort of the section on the back. But in fact, in the proposed plans, the classroom that we're talking about funding is cut off. It's page 11, or wait, my page numbers have been cut off. Page 14 or 13, I think, of our application, otherwise known as A101. Yep. I think that the new classroom space is down there. So if you don't have that drawn already, I'm not asking for any drawing, but if you have that, what it's going to look like when you connect those 2 spaces already drawn up, I think that would be good to see when you remove the wall.
So Bob has brought that up on the screen, so you can see how it's it's actually looking at our CAD drawings rather than a PDF. It's not black and white; it's actually colored. But that does show the floor plan for the room. We'll be happy to provide you with a better graphic.
So those you're showing, I think you're showing room dividers where there used to be the wall there. And I'm seeing maybe a room divider on against the window, or what is the what is the white outlined box there?
I think that
Eve,
go ahead.
that's a false wall that is in front of a historic wall that we
Oh, I
put
see.
up.
Okay, so that's going away too, presumably.
It's we can have it up or down depending on the art we're showing.
Okay. So in the end, you'll have one open space there. That looks great. And then this little back corner where we were wondering if those windows were original. And the plan south view of your wall there, they look original. It looks really cool. And so that's all I wondered. I was just making a comment that the plans are for the part that we're not funding. They're in the application, not for the part that we're funding. Just a comment there. Page 9 on our application, which has Platt's list of exactly what's happening to the 4 out of the 5 items, is really, really great part of our application. I'm one of the people who plummeted myself down into the basement and saw the mess underneath the bathroom. I'm completely obsessed with what's going on down there. I can hardly believe that $6,400 is going to do it for what has to be. The plumbing has to be moved and that beam reinforced and the floor put back in and the toilet hopefully attached firmly to the floor. I can't even believe what a mess that is. So I'm excited to see that done. But I did not see in the application where the sprinkler system was listed, and maybe this is just me going too quickly through it. I was just wondering if you had that in here somewhere, the 120.
It is at this point, it is an estimate from our sprinkler company. We have selected a system which is compatible with museum installations, similar to what they used at the Concord Museum, if I'm not mistaken. And there is no specific drawing which delineates where the heads are being located, but we have done the engineering to provide water service from the street and to set up for the overall planning for it, but specific heads have not been located in the building yet.
Oh yeah, I don't think we need a sprinkler head map. That was fine. I was just wondering where the 120 came from exactly, and you've answered that question. So I appreciate that. Thank you.
Thank you, Eve.
I have one final question.
Yeah. Yes, Nancy?
One final question. What happens with the entry? Is that going to be completely redone or just new windows and whatnot?
The front entrance?
Yes, front entrance.
That is staying exactly as it is.
Okay, thank you.
No changes to that.
Thank you.
Okay, and now Paul.
I have a real quick question on timing. Your timing, you're doing construction starting in 2024. You're aware that the CPC funding requests go before town meeting in April, and then I think the money is not available until July. Correct me if I'm wrong. And I just want to make sure that that comports with your plans for 2024.
Thank you for clarifying that cash flow issue. We were aware of that. I don't think that's going to affect our specific commitment to start, since it's going to be the lion's share of it's privately funded.
Okay, just wanted to be aware of it. Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay. It's a little hard to see with the presentation up if anybody has their hands raised, but there we go. Seeing no further hands raised, I think then we can move on to our next application. Thank you very much, Natalie and others, for running us through those details. We appreciate it very much.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, and that brings us to Lee Smith from CHDC to discuss their application for affordable housing buy-down funds. Lee.
Good evening. Thanks for having us. I'm here with Liz Rust from RHSO, who is our staff person and responsible for most of the good work that we put forward. So I'll just thank Liz in advance for her attendance. So she's running our slide deck. I'll go through this quickly and then be available we both will be available to answer any questions you might have. So as you saw in the application, it's a request for fiscal year 25 CPC funds, specifically for the creation and preservation of affordable housing that would be performed by Concord Housing Development Corporation. And I neglected to say that I'm the president and chair of that entity. So this request is for 267,100 $80 that, if awarded, would be combined with 233,880 that CPC awarded and was appropriated in FY21, giving us a total of $500,000 that would enable us to either acquire property for affordable housing purposes or to purchase essentially new extended affordable housing deed restrictions. So if I could take a moment just to really kind of cut to the chase what this is really all about. CHDC doesn't have a sustainable source of funding. Any money that we receive is either from specific appropriations on, call it an annual basis, or whenever we happen to apply. And effectively, the only money we've got on hand is enough to manage our corporation on a day-to-day basis. So when a project becomes known or available, we are scrambling to find sources of funds to put together whatever it's going to cost to make that project work. So what we've been doing, at least during my tenure, is either seeking an appropriation from either free cash or CPC or other town sources. The Concord Housing Foundation has been a tremendous benefactor to our entity to create affordable housing, and any other sources that might be available. So the issue with that is, leaving the foundation aside as a private entity, we're stuck. We're beholden to the town meeting appropriation cycle. So depending on where we are in the calendar, worst case, you're a year away. Best case, you're 6 months or so away. So what happens in reality is, let's just use an example of a single family, smaller home is up for sale and it's a reasonable price. And we say, okay, that would be a good opportunity to create an affordable unit. Well, it goes on the market tomorrow, and maybe within a week, it's purchased by frequently a developer who's going to tear it down these days, or maybe just a buyer who's going to move in. So the point is that if we don't have the funds needed to at least put down a deposit and make an offer on that property, it's gone. So these things happen extremely quickly. So really the purpose of this request is to ideally have in the range of $500,000 on hand, available. So if an opportunity arises to purchase a property and make it into an affordable unit, deed restricted, ideally added to the subsidized housing inventory, we're ready to go. And that's been one of the issues that has limited CHDC's ability to accomplish its mission of creating and preserving affordable housing in Concord. Thanks, Liz. Third slide. All right, so this buy down program that I'm describing at a high level, I'll point out, is identified as a strategy in the 2022 Housing Production Plan. It's part of the 2018 Envision Concord Comprehensive Plan, and is one of the specific criterions in CPC's community housing category of funding. What a buy down does basically is subsidize the difference between the market price and the affordable price in exchange for a perpetual affordable housing restriction. The result is that ideally that housing unit gets added to the subsidized housing inventory. And if you've been following any of the affordable housing world going on within Concord, that number, if you're below 10%, the way the state calculates it, if you're 10% of your housing inventory, if you're below 10%, then you're subject to what they call 40B development, which in short enables a developer to circumvent most of the zoning requirements that are otherwise applicable. So that can result in a project that is either in a location or is a size or scale or appearance that would otherwise may not be favorable or wanted in the town. So as it stands literally today, Concord is 3 units below the 10% threshold. So I acknowledge that this request wouldn't come to fruition until July, but depending there is a 40B development proposed on Baker Ave, but if hypothetically free properties became available between now and then, we could ideally get the town even with the 10% and protect the town from unwanted development in a perfect world. So that's kind of a real world example of how this all works. An example that I've used in this slide is, high level, just to kind of make the most sense for anyone looking at it. If your house goes on the market for $900,000 and we want to turn it into an affordable unit, the most we could sell it for is $500,000. We've got to come up with the extra $400,000 as a subsidy to make up the difference. So your funding and other sources of funding can help accomplish that. Next slide. Right, so we have used this buy down program in the past. Some success stories are 930 Main Street, where CHDC purchased a single family home. We brought on early on Habitat for Humanity, and were able to have them convert it into 2 units of SHI home ownership units. They were sold to eligible purchasers. And even in that instance, we needed additional funds from town meeting, from free cash, Concord Housing Foundation, and of course, Habitat in terms of their labor and taking on the responsibility of not only developing it, but finding eligible purchasers and doing the financing to make that happen. And that example was a total cost of about $512,000, and CPC contributed $186,000 for that. Another example, kind of more straightforward, quote unquote, buy down, is a home on Hingham Lane that there's maybe 8 brand new homes developed there. At least one of which was designated as an affordable unit, and hypothetically they could have sold it for, I'm making this up, but 130% of area median income, and that would qualify. But we had the opportunity to pay the developer additional funds and bring the purchase price of that house down to a level where it would qualify on the SHI and be more affordable for the buyer. So those are 2 relatively recent examples. All right, so preservation of existing units. This is the other category where a buy down is typically used. Emerson Annex project was creation of 11 condominiums around 1988. And way back then, it was kind of the beginning stages of Massachusetts affordable housing projects, with state involvement and how the affordable housing restrictions were drafted and used. They weren't at that time expected to be forever or in perpetuity. They were typically 20 years, 30 years, something in that range, and then they're set to expire. So there was at least one example that in 2006 had in fact expired, and for any number of reasons wasn't able to be preserved. And then what happens if that expires is that unit is no longer subject to the deed restriction and can be sold at market rate, and it's a lost affordable unit. So we know of approximately 5 units that have similar restrictions that are, I'm sorry, 4 units that we know are going to be expiring within the next 5 to 12 years that'll need funds to buy down the expiring restrictions to be able to purchase what ideally are perpetual restrictions, keeping those units on the SHI. There were examples of about 5 that we were able to do that historically. So I won't get into this in detail just in the interest of time, but as I mentioned, the Housing Production Plan Strategy 15, it does specifically call out CHDC as the entity to create and preserve affordable housing units. And this is one way that we can do that. I'll just call your attention to, as I'm sure you're aware, your own criteria number 4 about creating and preserving affordable housing through the buy down program and other mechanisms. And then I'll just point out lastly the 2018 Envision Concord goal number 2 about developing additional self-sustaining funding mechanisms supporting achieving of the housing targets, and that Emerson Annex project is specifically mentioned. And just a bigger picture goal of the affordable housing groups, if you will, is to discourage the tear downs that we see so frequently here of smaller homes and replaced with significantly larger homes that are typically well north of $1 million. So as I said to begin with, having these funds on hand is critical in order to be able to respond to these opportunities as they present themselves. And without that money, either immediately available or in very short order, those opportunities are lost. And that is all I have. I'm happy to take any questions.
Thank you, Lee. The folks working on this application are Diane and myself. Diane, would you like to ask your questions?
Thank you. I want to begin, Lee, by thanking you so much for both the presentation, for what you've taught me over the years about affordable housing. I've learned so much, kind of sitting at your feet and learning enormously. I have an essential question, Lee. Why does the CHDC need that money when perhaps the trust fund has the money, and then you just turn to them and say, gosh, we need that money right now, and they turn it over to you, and bingo, you make a conversion. Why double that money? I mean, can you explain to me why it's more? Okay. Does that make sense?
Sure. So the trust is definitely a possibility of a funding source. Most of you should recall that that's a pretty recently created entity, past few years. They are independent from us, and they've got their own process and procedures, and frequently seek the input and approval from the select board. And within the past, I'll call it 6 months, they have identified their own list of priorities in the short term, and identified specific projects that they want to allocate or reserve their existing funds to be used for. And CHTC is the beneficiary of that for 3 projects. One is the Assabet River Homes project, which is creating 5 affordable units. That's underway. The second is the Junction Village site behind the prison that we're about to put out or request for proposals for. And then the third is our small grants program, which is just about out of money. So while we're eligible for something like this, I think just based on what I've heard and seen and read, we'd probably, for this particular type of project, we'd be lower down the list. Certainly a priority is not guaranteed a favorable response to a request. So whereas CPC has this, community housing allocation available, and the fact that we are separate entities, if it's allocated specifically to CHDC, we know we can count on that for the purposes that I outlined.
Can I augment that? I just wanted to show you, if I could, so that the trust, they have put on the website their implementation priorities. And you can see here that they're very supportive of the efforts of the CHDC in terms of Assabet River Bluff, Junction Village, and the small grants program, which is, you can see those there. But for this particular buy down opportunity is not on the list here, even not in the allocate, which is their priority, or even in the reserve column.
If they had more funds in hand, if we were after perhaps this pending special legislation, if it's ever enacted, with whether it's the surcharge or whatever the case may be, it might be a completely different story, but they've got a limited pool of money right now.
And I think that, there's many strategies for affordable housing, and certainly creating new units through the Assabet River Bluff and the Junction Village are great strategies, and they take longer. They take years, those kinds of developments with the RFPs and all of that. Being able to convert existing market rate homes like was done on 930 Main Street is just another kind of tool in the affordable housing toolbox that is important when the opportunities become available. And if they don't become available, then the funds just sit there with the CPA and can be returned and reallocated at another time. But it's nice to be able to do that and be able to look for those opportunities where you can use existing properties and convert them to affordable housing.
That's very
These are really one-off projects, if you will, rather than larger scale planned developments.
Absolutely. I was just trying to clarify why not just the application and let that trust fund be the
It's a good
recipient
question.
of most of the money, and then but that you've clarified that. That's terrific. One more question. When you're scoping out where these small projects might be and where you might spend the money, with whom do you work to figure that out? I mean, how do you discern that? Do you work with local realtors? Do you work with what is your mechanism or vehicle for identifying this kind of opportunity?
I could say one thing right now, just if I could, Lee, there's the Mill Run development that's right next to Riverwalk.
Oh.
And there are two, this is like the Ingham Lane project in some ways, that there were two units that were conditioned through their PRD permit to be restricted. One is at 80% to count on the SHI, and one is at 150% AMI, which is the moderate income. So these funds could be used to create another buy down that 150% that the planning board would require to make it SHI eligible. For example, that's what was done on Ingham Lane,
Right.
as well as something that's just, like the 930 Main Street, which is just, existing detached units. But you could do negotiating with developers who are getting units restricted, conditioned through the planning process.
And the other way is frankly, it's literally word on the street,
Right.
either a real estate agent or a developer or someone who just heard something. There's no set pattern to it. You just become aware, by chance, by luck.
Concord grapevine. So
exactly.
Yeah. So quickly, a couple more. So that in terms of go ahead, Bert, and I'll come right back.
Well, sure. And my questions, Lee, were actually limited to the sort of this exact same subject matter that Diane started out with. But I wanted to ask first, I think you said that this is being added to the 233,880 that was in the 2021 fiscal year, right? So those are funds that were on an application at that time and remain unspent.
Correct.
Correct.
Okay.
We haven't had an opportunity that fit well within that
fits within that amount of money. Yeah. Right. And so I mean, here's kind of my thinking, and I'll just be super candid. The applications we received for affordable housing this year were approximately 66% of what we would estimate would likely be to our total budget, roughly estimated. And so we either need to really swing the needle in the direction of affordable housing in this funding year when we've got a lot of other projects tied to 2025 and the like, or we need to figure out something, a way to take a really close look at the three affordable housing applications we got. And seeing those three, it's given me a lot of time. I've done a lot of thinking about, well, what's the trust role vis-a-vis Concord Housing Authority, CHDC, and it's just interesting to hear about the trust picking its own priorities, you having somewhat slightly different priorities. We heard an answer that was pretty direct from CHA about them having somewhat different priorities from CHA when they were here for us a couple of weeks ago. This comes together in that we've got money, a small bucket of money that we allocated over 3 years ago, right? That's been sitting there unused. And I appreciate that that's not big enough maybe for a buy down. The trust has a big pot of money, right? And I kind of feel like this committee's job is to put the money in the hands of the bank, which is the trust, and then the trust should be responding to CHDC and CHA in terms of doling out this money. You were distinguishing the projects of sort of the big focus things that they're doing, that they're coming out, that they're supporting you in, versus these buy down projects, which tend to be these smaller onesie twosies. But certainly the trust can fund those, right?
Sure.
The buy downs,
assuming they've got funds allocated for it. So if we had a buy down opportunity present itself tomorrow, we would have to ask for permission to apply to them because we're not pre-approved, so to speak. They would then consider even that, and then it's step by step to ultimately see if we would get the money.
Wait, you're not pre-approved to apply for funding from the Concord?
The way I understand it, you need not as an entity, but they're doing it by project. So we're not pre-approved for a buy down project. They have pre-approved us and reserved funds for those 3 projects: Assabet River, Junction Village, and small grants that are set aside effectively for us when exactly we need them. So this would be a different category, a different request entirely that they would probably put, and I'm speaking for them, I shouldn't, but let's just say put at the bottom of the list of the other requests for their pool of money. And we're competing with anybody else who's either ahead of us or who has a more, in their view, attractive.
It's interesting
so
because
I can just show you their process here on their website here.
Yeah.
So they coordinate, maintain their list of priority projects, and then they invite priority sponsors to apply. So you need to be invited to apply for their funds.
Okay. So what's interesting is I thought the trust was essentially a more flexible funding mechanism in that it allows us to pool money, and it has the money on an as needed basis. You can go after it. It's actually sounding like instead of if we were to put all our money there as a committee, that might actually make it's less flexible. In other words, that then the trust has to go through the funding cycle of this committee, and then the trust has its own requirements, which may not be in line with our well-established housing groups. I guess what I'm just trying to balance in my head. We have a goal, which is affordable on this committee, affordable housing and affordable housing yesterday, right? Like, we missed by 3 units. We had $1.5 million across the money that you had, plus what had been allocated to the Junction Village and so forth, sitting there for years. That would have gotten us 3 units, right? And we want to be.
It would have got us 83 units.
It would have gotten us. Yeah. Well, fair enough. Fair enough. So I'm kind of scratching my head. It's more of a comment, and I don't want to take up too much more airtime, but I just wanted to let you know where my head is. I see a hand raised. Diane, did you have an additional question that you wanted to come back to? Because
a chance to play through for a minute, Burton, because I wasn't sure. I didn't want to hog the time. Just very quickly. So one of the advantages of using the CHDC is you don't have to go to the select board, right? The trust fund has chosen to have all grants approved by the select board. Is that true?
I don't know, honestly, whether they seek direct approval for each project.
I think they do.
Their framework is approved by the select board.
Okay, it has been my sense. We'll have to go back and actually ask that question
And
again.
also, the CHDC is a separate 501c3 and not subject to public procurement or public construction. So which adds another 40% off of any public construction. So it's a much more cost-effective developer.
Right.
So if we had all the money we needed in hand, we could put an offer on a property tomorrow.
Okay.
We don't need to go to anybody else.
And then one more quick clarification. To eradicate the status of 40B, is it true or not true that if we show that, for instance, the Novo development over on Baker Avenue, if we show that that's going forward and the planning board approves it and the planning board of appeal approves it and everything's going forward, does that, just by the very nature of saying that we're going to do that, remove us from the 40B vulnerability or not? I know we
issue the permit.
Not until the permit has been issued. Okay,
right.
Thank you.
And then you have to follow up with a building permit in 1 year.
Okay, thank you.
So the zoning permit, and then 1 year later, the building permit.
Okay, I wanted that clarification. Thank you.
Sure.
Okay, Diana, are you all set? Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Edward, you've been waiting patiently.
Great. When Keith Bergman spoke, on the 27th of September, Burton asked him a question that he didn't really have an answer for, which was, are the housing groups collaborating with each other? And I was, I was surprised that he didn't really have an answer on that, because we really work awfully hard, and I know Liz and Lee have been instrumental in the development of this housing roundtable, the housing production plan, which was developed pretty much with the understanding we were going to be under by just a few houses. And the housing production plan basically says what we're planning to do, and and the assumption, and it's not written in the law on this, but that the state is not going to enforce the 40B right away. In other words, we have to prove our mettle on putting in money, putting the money in to get us over the 10%. And I just think that the collaboration that's going on, and maybe Lee or Liz could talk about this, it is based on the fact that we are hopefully going to get a home rule approval for transfer tax and other taxes that will provide the funding that right now we're just dependent on CPC, as well as any free cash that the town is willing to provide. Whereas in the long run, the Affordable Housing Trust is really meant to be the way that we'll process this money that'll come from the home rule, taxes. So maybe Lee or Liz can go on about a little bit about the fact that we do collaborate, which was Keith. I think he was a little bit maybe tired. It was the last question that was asked or something at that time, but I was a little upset that we didn't defend ourselves as the fact that we all are working very hard because this is a real important issue, and I know that it's a 1.2 million total is what's been asked for the three housing authorities, and this the money that we will get from the warrant items that are on home rule would much reduce that in the future. So I would just I'm not really supposed to advocate for what the project people are doing, but we're all part of this group that has brought housing into focus in town, and I think in the long range, everybody, and especially the CPC, because of the important role that it plays, will make this thing get over the finish line, and not just the 40B, but actually make Concord a more welcoming community, and all the things we think Concord already is. So anyway, I'll get off my soapbox then.
Thank you, Ed. Yeah. Sue, I think you had your hand up next.
Yes, and sorry, my video's been freezing or blanking all evening. I apologize for that. Okay, I'm not, first of all, some paperwork type things. I am not sure if this is something Anne can take care of or that you could take care of, but that on your cover sheet for your application, the required project name is not present, and you did not check off your required copy of IRS determination letter or copy of audit of most recent financial information, even though those last two are in fact included. But speaking of which, I'm pretty new to this. This is my first grant of funding, and so I don't know what to make of this. On your independent accountant's compilation report, the second paragraph begins, management has elected to omit substantially all the disclosures required by accounting principles generally accepted in the United States of America, which I found very disturbing. Maybe this is common practice, but I thought I needed to bring that to light and ask what is going on with that.
I can't speak to what specific disclosures they're referring to, but what I can speak to is that we've got a very rudimentary balance sheet. We've got very few transactions, either deposits or payments out, and we track those on a monthly basis and go over them at each of our monthly meetings, and it's watched very closely. And we do have a certified public accounting firm that does our annual tax returns, and this year, in fact, because of the Assabet River transaction. We surpassed having $1 million in our account for 10 minutes, so now we have to do a full-blown audit. So that they're doing that for us at not an insignificant expense. But you know, I don't know. I won't speak for them in terms of whether that's you know, boilerplate language that they have to provide, because we're not a Fortune 500 corporation. But it's pretty straightforward. If you'd like to see our financial statements, we'd be happy to share that with you, and maybe that would explain.
I'm not much of a financial whiz, but I did compare it to other applications we received, and there were numerous accountants' reports that said this is not the standard procedure, but none others that use that specific language. I think I will have to trust that somebody else who understands financial matters better than me can speak to whether it's an issue or not. I also went and looked up on the town website the language that you had pointed out earlier this evening about CMA, the Municipal Housing Trust, saying that it would invite priority project sponsors to complete and submit to the trust an application. This language is actually a little bit unclear. I read it as saying this is a standing invitation, so that you don't have to wait for them to invite you to as a priority project sponsor to submit an application. You can just go submit one, but I would certainly think it would be a good idea for them to clean up their language there and make it a little bit more clear as to exactly what they mean there. Thank you. That's all I have.
Thank you, Sue. Paul, you're next. Thanks.
I'll take it off mute. I just want to comment. So my recollection of the conversation we had with Keith was not collaboration. It was coordination in the preparation of these applications. And he said no. And probably that was because it was last minute, it was rushed. There was a lot of things in there. But personally, I think that the housing entities have put CPC in a bind here. In terms of how do we satisfy the real need for affordable housing increase in the light of applications which exceed our ability to fund. And so we have to have some way of thinking across these entities of CHDC and CHA and the trust. And I'm making more of a statement than anything else, but you know, I don't know how you can help us do that, because the coordination and the applications wasn't there. And I see a lot of reasons why it could have been and would have been helpful to us. And I don't know, Bert, it's probably a little too late to do that at this point, but I think we need to coordinate in our own heads to figure out how to proceed. So does that make sense?
Can I just add some thoughts on that?
Yeah,
please.
So let's call it within the past 6 months, as certainly the trust has been getting up and running, and as CHDC has had viable projects in the works. The conversation about what might CPC be able to do for affordable housing in the town generally has been discussed at significant length and detail. And I think what became apparent was, maybe historically, and please correct me if I'm wrong, but historically you want to consider specific discrete projects. So I've got a house at 123 Main Street that I want to buy. I need money for it. It's yes or no. So this is a little different, and maybe it's a new day, but we're asking for money for a project that does not yet exist. And I think perhaps the trust is doing something similar. And it may be that we both entities decided to apply, not knowing where CPC would come down, just on the concept generally. And are you more comfortable with just putting it in the bank, which I refer to? That's how I refer to the trust. Or do you want to put it in the hands of the developer, which is CHDC, who can just go and do it tomorrow, or a little of both? Just kind of left it to you. So I apologize if that puts you in an uncomfortable position, but that's the reality of where we are.
No, I know. And you know, this issue of, I'll call it banking versus real projects, you know, we haven't had the fuller discussion in CPC, so it's out there. But the coordination could have and would have helped. And I'm just making a statement. And so we'll have to move on and figure out how to be fair and receptive and do our duty here, but it's not going to be easy.
Thanks for the comment, Paul. Insightful. Eve, please. Eve, you're on mute. Sorry.
For crying out loud. Okay. We have had several comments that were of the big picture and a couple minutia. I have one of each. My minutia comment is your numbers don't add up on the front. And it's also on page 1 that 233, 880 and 267, 180 don't add up to 500,000. I don't know if that's bugging anyone else, but my big picture question is there ever going to be a possibility, or this is mostly for Liz, do we think that could be possible that either the trust could have one of their line items be this buy down program, or that the language or their structure could be changed somehow such that you don't have to be invited to apply for the money, or if it could be used more like the bank we all assumed it was going to be? That's my question.
I don't think we can answer that.
Right, I was going to say the trust is they're their own body, and they have taken up these guidelines after much deliberation through their meetings, and they have a lot of ideas about how they see their role and how to allocate the funding and prioritize that, and I think they've heard comments such as yours but I think that they have taken this approach. I guess that's all I can say. And it's new, so they're just now inviting people to apply for the money and putting out. They have guidelines and applications that are equally rigorous as yours in terms of applications and process and stuff. So so they're working through how to go about their funding process. And they do very much want the select board to endorse all of their decisions, as Diane mentioned. That's very much part of their process, as well as making sure that all of the projects are duly noted in the housing production plan. So I think those are their guardrails.
Thank you.
Well, actually, on that note, do we have any other questions for Lee this evening or Elizabeth? Okay, I was going to say on that note, it was pointed out to me that something we typically get and which might be particularly useful in this deliberation is input from the select board. Doesn't look like we've got our select board liaison on the call tonight, but the input from the select board of how they would rank the applications in terms of their priorities. And so, Anne, I think that would be something we want to work to communicate that to the select board, that we'd like that input. I think it's particularly important this time around. And I believe, Diane, is it correct that we've gotten it from the director of land planning and land management as well? I think we've done that when we've been awfully heavy on stuff that falls within that jurisdiction, which isn't really the case this time around.
I mean, I think we have listened to Linda Escobedo's sensibilities because she's been involved in affordable housing for so many years. But I don't think we've actually gone to the select board and asked for their priority list as much as we've to Linda.
Okay.
But
yes,
maybe my memory is faulty on that one. So
they've given us their opinions. I'm not sure we've asked for them, but they've certainly given them.
I think in the past, the select board did send priorities according to somebody I know who used to be part of that process. And I also have a copy of Marcia Rasmussen's priorities 1 year. And I think it's probably correct that was a heavy year for planning and land management, the same as this year.
Yeah, but I think you're exactly right, but I don't think it was in terms of ordering the housing applications. It was in terms of the whole set of applications. as I recall.
Yeah, for the select board, I think maybe it was the whole picture.
Yeah, in aggregate, but not to ask.
Oh, there's Peggy.
So I'm just asking for a little bit of independence for our committee is what I'm trying to guard here a little bit in terms of our adjudication of this, and certainly the advice of the select board and Linda's wisdom is always invaluable. But
well, key piece of data is going to be how much funding we have available.
I understand that, but I mean, I
we
think
we don't know that yet. So
I think the adjudication ultimately is and the discourse comes originally from us.
Yes,
advised by Linda and her insights. So at least that's my sensibility. So
I agree.
Okay, the good points, well made. I see. Any other comments from the board on Lee's application, or any? I think if none further on Lee, any comments on anything else of the applications we looked at tonight?
Peggy has her hand up.
I do. I just wanted to check with the committee first, and then with that, Peggy, please.
Hi, I'm sorry, I'm having a little trouble with my video, but I would lean more toward agreeing with Diane, having served both on the select board and CPC. I think it's really up to the CPC to develop their proposals and submit it as a warrant article, and the select board would, I think, generally veer toward what the CPC recommends. So long as it, obviously we have town plans and long range plans and housing plans and et cetera, et cetera. Thank you. That's all.
So can I just, sorry.
Yes, please, Elizabeth.
So I just want to say that, it's in many ways, it's exciting to see all these requests because there's been so little housing production done in Concord for many years. And the housing production plan has really mobilized and gotten people thinking about how to create housing. So to see the CHDC and the CHA to come forward, as well as the trust, is in some ways pretty exciting, that kind of energy looking to actually create housing. It's maybe a good problem to have. I don't know.
Yeah. All right. And I've kind of broken the rules. We stayed within 20 minutes or less for all of them, except for this last one, and which we then ran way over. So I think with that, if we're done with the discussion on the applications for tonight, Lee and Elizabeth, thank you very much for your time and participation in your application. And I think we can move on to our next agenda item.
Thank you all. Thanks for your consideration.
Thank you. The next agenda item, I believe, is approval of minutes, and I'm just trying to get to that quickly. The approval of minutes of June 20th and July 18th from earlier this year.
I would like to make a motion to approve both of those minutes.
Can we do it separately? Because I wasn't there
sorry,
for the.
my bad.
I wasn't there for one of them, so we probably need to do them separately.
Second.
Okay.
Then I would like to make a motion to approve the June 20th minutes.
Second.
Thank you.
Go, take it over.
Is that including the comments I sent along?
Well, let's address that. And did you get comments from Sue? I don't recall seeing.
Yes, I did include them and I uploaded them right away.
You okay. All right. Okay, great. Let's take a vote then. Paul.
Aye.
Sarah.
Aye.
Edward.
Aye.
Diane.
Aye.
Eve.
Yes.
Nancy.
Aye.
Sue.
Aye.
And I'm a yay. Do we have a motion on the? Do we have a motion on the other? Was that? Did we just? So moved by Nancy.
Second.
Seconded by Paul. Let's do this vote in the same order. Paul.
Yes.
Paul. Sarah.
I was absent.
So you can actually vote. You can abstain. Okay. Edward. Diane. Eve.
Yes.
Nancy.
Aye.
Sue.
Hey,
It was. I'm sorry. I actually had a little trouble. You were breaking up a little. Was that a yay or a nay?
that was a yay. Maybe I should stick.
Okay, just double
Stick with
checking.
I.
Okay, just
Oh,
double
yes.
checking. And I'm an I on that as well. I think that concludes our formal agenda for the evening. Did anybody else have any comments they wanted to make as we've had one more meeting with applications coming forward, and then we get into deliberations. There were a couple of comments that people had individually sent in via email that I were just like the comment about getting input from the director of plan management and the select board. Anything else anybody wants to add before we adjourn?
I just think we're going to have to have a very candid discourse about the whole housing issue, because I think Paul put it beautifully when he said, we're kind of in a to be in a dilemma, not of anybody's particular making, but we're going to have to be very clear-headed about how we work this one through.
Yeah, I agree. Although
always clear-headed, but I'm just
my sense is, though, the applicants kind of all know that they understand that we've got to potentially make some choices here. So which is good. Okay, with that, may I get a motion to adjourn?
Move.
Second.
Thank you. And I am a yes. Paul?
Yes.
Sarah?
Yes.
Edward?
Yes.
Diane?
Aye.
Nancy?
Me too, aye.
Eve and Eve?
Yes, and I think you could
And-
just adjourn us and we don't have to take a vote.
Yeah, I have a question for the parliamentarians.
I think that's right.
Do we need a vote to adjourn, or can the chair just adjourn?
So I'm voting aye, but I've said before, you can just adjourn us.
Yeah, that's the practice we had on the planning board for sure.
I think the vote is if some people only are participating. I saw something in administrative blah 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 about that. I think that.
What do you mean, Nancy?
It was in the administrative. It was in.
What do you mean if only some were there?
I'm sorry. If only some were participating remotely and others were participating in person.
Okay.
Then you have to identify the people who are remote.
Before we adjourn, I have a question. So are we open to suggestions from the housing applicants for how to simplify, or would that violate the fact that we have to look at each application separately? I'm just kind of throwing that out there. Or can they help us to help them, or no? I don't want to get into
I think there have been lots of times where we've asked for supplemental materials or on applications. I think this is a case where if there were particular things we wanted them to clarify, I would be comfortable going back to them. Yeah. Edward?
I was just going to say it's very easy for the three, different housing authority applicants to talk to each other about what we need to do. So I'll just pass the word to our executive director, and we don't actually build or we're property managers, and we just added to our mission statement that we would advocate for affordable housing. So. We came up with some funding source, so we thought we should try to see if we could get enough to actually do something, but we wouldn't be the ones that actually do it. We tried that, and now we ended up with a Habitat doing that project on Commonwealth Ave. So, I'm I know we've kind of adjourned, so maybe.
Yeah, I apologize.
Yeah, we've adjourned.
Post adjournment.
All right. Well, thank you all. We'll see you in, I think it's 2 weeks, and have a good evening.
Thank
you. Good night.